Okay, NatDip, this is Keel. What I want to do is basically give you a little talk through of the assignment brief and the resources that are available for you to use. Now, obviously, because of the snow, you know, I've basically lost 3 hours worth of teaching time with you, so hopefully this video will make up for it. What I'm going to do is extend the deadline until midnight on Friday, which should give you sufficient time to gather enough evidence for the final submission. So, talk through the unit then. P3. So first of all, discuss advantage and limitation of animated GIFs. Well, we completed that task during the observed session. For the most part, P3, prepare some notes to help you on the day, including description of features, advantage, limitation of animated GIFs. Okay, now, whereas it says prepare notes, we performed the presentation, and through questioning, those your knowledge of animated GIFs would have come to the fore. Obviously everybody did a slightly different presentation. A note about this though, just so for your reference sake, the animation formats, well, everyone's work is available here on this M2 collaborative area. So if you go onto the Padlet, you can see everybody's different presentations which are available for review on there. Obviously you can use this as a reference point, a collaborative area, should you decide to upload work to it. For example, there's somebody's uploaded an M2 notes table, don't plagiarize, use it as a reference point. Okay, so moving back to the assignment brief then. Okay, so P3, you don't really have to worry about that anymore. Okay, so M2 then, so once you've proved your understanding of GIF animations, you will compare this format in a table with two other formats below, include quality of the images and features. So we've got a number of different areas that you can compare. So first of all, dynamic HTML, Flash, Shockwave, QuickTime, and APNG. So it became evident during the question period at the presentation day that APNG, whilst is a good animation format, represents true color as opposed to 256 colors like an animated GIF, and it also provides alpha transparency gradients. So as opposed to a GIF where you'll get pixelation around the edges, an APNG will provide percentage transparency in the animation. But as Sam pointed out during the presentation, the APNG isn't fully supported by all browsers in the instance of like Internet Explorer, for example. So referencing compatibility here, you can see the APNG, according to Wikipedia, not a reliable source, but each of these statistics is footnoted back to the W3C, that APNGs are not compatible with Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge, which are basically the same product. But they are compatible with every other browser there. So pros and cons really. APNG more powerful, but the disadvantage is that it's not compatible with Internet Explorer. So how much does that matter? Well, if we look at the usage of share of web browsers over the years, maybe in 2010 it was massively important since Internet Explorer accounted for 60% of the browser share market, but moving on to 2015 it has reduced down to approximately about 14% of web browser users. But this is an important point about accessibility really. If you think that 5% of college users are in a wheelchair, does that mean you don't build lifts and ramps? Well, no, it doesn't, because you have to account for everybody. Okay, and same goes for the web really. So if a format doesn't work, you're left with two choices, right? You can either create the format in the APNG, upload it to your website, and then 10% of your market share don't use that, or you can create the format as the APNG, then create a browser JavaScript that detects browser and then forwards them to a animated GIF. So what have you done in that scenario? You've doubled your workload. Or you can just revert back to the older format. You also got to bear in mind that there's a completely different demographic for Internet Explorer as opposed to Chrome, for example. So a lot more young people use Chrome. They initially started out using Firefox, and then you can immediately see the reverse correlation. So everybody started off with Fireworks as an alternative to Internet Explorer as a reliable browser. Then Chrome took off, and pretty much the migration of users have gone from Fireworks to Chrome, and then some crossover from different people. And of course here you can see the emergence of mobile versus desktop there as well. So basically there's a number of different factors that you have to consider when using APNGs. So if your target market sits in the Internet Explorer user base, then you can't use an APNG. If it sits in the Chrome user base and there's an even more of a smaller percentage of your target audience in the Internet Explorer demographic, then you can use that. You can't use it. So those are the two things to consider with the APNGs. So moving back to your QuickTime, well, QuickTime, as was highlighted in the presentation, QuickTime cannot be used. It's not really a compression format, although it can be used on mobile devices. It's not used on. It's not frequently used as a desktop-based animation publishing format because of the lack of compression. So, and I mean that via web, because you can't really buffer it very well. Shockwave completely depreciated and it's dead. You just need to really highlight the fact that Shockwave is dead and nobody uses it anymore. Flash, you can talk, reams about mobile devices and Apple doesn't support it, and Apple accounts for XYZ number of percentage of the user base. So dynamic HTML again is another option to talk about there. So when the bare minimum that you need to produce for the M2 is you have to compare GIF to two formats. Okay. Now, why have I created a table that includes more formats in the oops, where we go? More formats. Well, the reason is twofold. If you mess up on one of the explanations, you don't provide enough detail on one of the formats, you've got more to choose from. So if you're confident in your abilities, compare it to two across the board. If you're not so confident in your knowledge of any animation format, try and fill it in for everything. The bare minimum is two. So in these instances, talk about compare dynamic HTML as a possible format for animated memes. So taking you through this example, walkthrough, talk through, well, you couldn't necessarily use dynamic HTML for animated memes because they're going to be shared across the web. Flash you could potentially use, but you won't be able to view them on mobile devices. QuickTime, probably not, to be honest. APNG for the reasons we discussed, and Shockwave is depreciated anyway and it's just going to go out the door. Pick another random one. Animated web banners, you could definitely use dynamic HTML for this because you can provide interactivity elements to it. As Joe highlighted in his presentation, you could use Flash for this because it's got interactivity and it's got its own scripting language as well. So pros and cons, GIF doesn't have scripting language. QuickTime, well, if it's animated web banners, you want to reduce your page load times, so QuickTime doesn't use compression, so make up your own mind about that. And APNG, same reference to the user base and everything related to that. Okay, so that is a summary of your M2. Moving on. Okay, P4. So once you have passed the initial interview, and this is scenario stuff, and the group discussion, you're required to take a simple test where you demonstrate clear and sound understanding of basic techniques used in animation. Prepare a PowerPoint summary to help you to revise the most common software tools. You may include an animation showing evidence of the tools used, all of these different areas. So you will also need to prove your knowledge of specific animation software, and this is stuff that's just not available on the college networks apart from Flash 2D. So I've written some notes about the P4 area on Moodle. So here, where's it gone? Refresh. Okay, so P4 then. So for this submission, the task is very thorough, although a lot of work has already been covered in class. The rest of it you'll have to research. Prepare a PowerPoint summary to help you revise the most common software tools. So layers will have been covered by your Fireworks documentation of the lightsaber battle. Controls, additional research will be required to cover this. Tweening, additional research required, but if anybody's ever used Flash before, create a shape in one keyframe, move along 5 keyframes and create another shape, and then just right click on the timeline, create motion tween, and there you go, that's your answer. Buttons, now this is covered by the dynamic HTML documentation that I'm about to talk through in a minute. Libraries, additional research will be required on your part independently. Symbols will be covered by Flash documentation that I will cover in a minute. Integrating other media is kind of covered by the fireworks documentation on your lightsaber rotoscoping, because what you did was you imported video into, you know, a video editor and then converted it into a frame-by-frame animation and then brought it down into fireworks. So that's like integrating other media. Preloaders and scripts, that's additional research is going to be required on your part. So you will also need to prove your knowledge of different animation software you said in your CV, e.g. vector graphics. So this has been covered in part by Fireworks and Flash. Bitmap graphics, that will be covered by Fireworks documentation and Flash documentation. Specialist software packages. Right, now these ones, all of this, you're just basically going to have to do a little presentation slide on each of them. What do they do? What are the main features, advantages, disadvantages, that kind of stuff. Adobe Flash 2D is covered by your Flash documentation. Briefly described the vector and bitmap graphics software. So vector animation will be covered in Flash. Bitmap graphics software will be covered in your Fireworks documentation. So what am I talking about when I say documentation? Well, if you look up the screen, and this is what we were going to do on Monday, so I've got a tutorial here for animated rollovers using dynamic HTML and CSS3. Basically, oh, it's not annoying, is it? Ah, got to go through it. Right. So this is a tutorial that takes you through a really simple dynamic rollover button. And you basically go through the motions of this, produce your dynamic rollover button, and what you'll do thereafter is that will constitute evidence for your P4, because you'll have a basis of comparison because you would have programmed a button to work, and that will account for a lot of your P4 evidence. Honestly, this will literally take you as long as the video is, six minutes thereabouts. But there is a sample file available here. That's what it does. So it's basically dynamic HTML. The rendering and the frame rate is really good, actually. So make that, document it, and that will constitute some evidence for P4. In addition, P4 tutorial, how to animate in Flash frame by frame. Complete this tutorial and document it. So what it does is it talks about keyframe animation, and it animates a stickman figure. And it talks about the main features of Flash. And just a tip for you for your presentation, on the one hand, you could do this yourself and document it. On the other hand, you could just take screenshots of this guy doing it and then incorporate it in your project. Just a word to the wise. Okay, next, going back. Okay, so for these additional software formats in your presentation, a good way of answering the question might be to go and find some tutorials on each software. So if I search for Dream Studio Introduction, and I might be able to find a walkthrough talkthrough of Dream Studio, and then ignore these guys for a bit. So this guy's presenting a talkthrough of the software, and essentially, I'm not saying copy it, but that's what you're doing in terms of the research. So he's giving you the answers in effect. and instead of you going out to find screenshots, you can just literally like screenshot what he's doing, because you're not actually going to be able to open the software yourself. So this is this example. Again, you can literally go through all of these. Some of them are obscure, but like for example Maya and Blender, there's loads of stuff on there. So if I go to Maya Introduction and look, Maya Introduction tutorial, you don't have to sit through 2 hours of it, but you can literally get the general gist of it, where the guy explains what he's doing on the screen. So you take a screenshot of it, put it on your work, and then basically repeat what he's saying in the explanation. So obviously he's giving you like an environment overview there of all the tools. So that's an option for you. Okay. So yeah, P4 PowerPoint summary covering all of this. Now, for the most part, where you've done it in your documentation of processes, so for example here it says you include an animation showing evidence of the tools used, you can use your documentation of your rotoscoping and your Flash tutorial within P4. Okay, moving on. D1 then, compare Adobe Flash CS5 with another package. Prepare a table and a report that discusses the following. How are tools used in the two software packages? Which one is easier to use? Which one offers more tools and features? Okay, so having completed the tutorial on Fireworks and completed the tutorial on Flash, you've pretty much done this. You just need to summarize it in a report, and you can use screenshots from the documentation of both processes. So P5 then. These days animation is used on websites to enhance the content of the website and make it more accessible. If you were asked to animate for a website, what factors will you take into consideration? Briefly explain why. In effect, this is a regurgitation of the accessibility on different animation formats. So cover the animation formats, but in addition to that, what I've done is provided a list of resources for P5. So for example, P5, 25 wonderful examples of animated email marketing templates. So reference this in P5. These examples shows examples of good design. Design is a factor that needs to be taken into account when creating animations for the web. So note the keyword to the specification there. P5 states that you need to describe factors that need to be taken into account when creating animations for the web. Funnily enough, factor that needs to be account when creating animations for the web. So P5, there you go. Just have a look at that, reference it. P5 research, another factor that you need to take into account is using animated GIFs in emails. Now, obviously, the specification of QCF is a bit old, so where you've got P5 research, the problem with animated GIFs in emails, basically when the specification was created, animated GIFs in emails were mostly supported, but basically the industry started overusing them, and then emails just got so clunky, and the main email clients decided to disable them by default. So this article highlights why compatibility is a major issue when using animated GIFs in emails and provides a solution to solve it, and that's come from SurveyMonkey. Okay, so the next one is a little guide on Ecards, and this is basically me going through the processes of a workaround for accessibility factors for using those. Why are we talking about Ecards? Well, it's in the specification. They require you to do a little bit about Ecards, and this is some research that you can read and regurgitate in a non-plagiarisy kind of way to produce your report. So P5, example of previous exemplar student work. Don't plagiarise it. There's a lot of work on the web of other students' submissions, and a lot of it is just sheer dross. So I'd rather you take influence from a decent project without copying it than looking at all the rubbish ones around on the web. So you can have a look at this whenever it loads, but the link's there. Don't copy it directly. If you want to use it as a structure influence, you can. Don't worry about that. So that's P5. So going back to the assignment, M2, compare different animation formats, pretty much covered that. M3, explain particular techniques that are used to minimize the file size of animations. So scroll down. M3. Right, as mentioned in task 5, file size is one of the factors that needs to be considered when animating for the web. Explain what techniques can be used to minimize the file size of animations. Look at the unit contents, blah blah blah. Alright, so this is just like another version of Unit 30 graphic design. So you went through like a task where you had to do compression for your animation files. So this is just an extension of that. You're just literally going to go through the export options and document the different kinds of compression that can be applied to the file sizes. Yeah, that's pretty much all it is really. So if you want to have a look at M3, I'll see if I can upload some more resources by the end of this video so that it will support you in that submission. Anyway, I don't want to keep this video massive because obviously the lesson's going to end. So good luck with it. If you've got any questions, then feel free to, I don't know, email me within the next hour. Cheers, bye.